Alrighty, time for this week's Savings Scribe segment, and today we are talking to Savings.com.au finance journalist Bernadette Lunas, who has appeared on this podcast several times before as the editor of Your Investment Property magazine, but today she's wearing her Savings.com.au hat, and she's written an article recently for the website on Australian home ownership and tenancy statistics, basically unpacking, whether the great Australian dream of owning a home is still alive or slowly waning. G'day, Bern. Great to have your company.
Hey, Dom. Hi, Brooke. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, Bern. It's so good to have you back again. This is such a meaty topic, home ownership in Australia. It's something that's been in headlines, I think, consistently my entire life, and probably before that too. So I guess before we jump into it, though, do you have a savings tip to share with us today, Bern?
Yes, I do. So a savings tip for today is to... before we go to home ownership statistics and all that, is to maintain your home to avoid major repair costs. So this one isn't really flashy, but it might be one of the most financially important habits you can build if you're a homeowner, maintaining your home to avoid major repair costs. So now we all know the cost of living has been rising. Inflation hasn't just hit groceries. The price of trades, materials, and even those call-out fees has climbed. So it means that small problems left unattended can become very, very expensive problems down the line. And that's exactly why preventative maintenance is very important. So think of your home like a car. Regular servicing keeps it running smoothly. So with your car, with your home, you can start with a low-cost annual maintenance checklist, something you can run through every year, ideally at the same time, so it becomes a habit. So start with gutters, for example. A simple clean out once or twice a year can prevent thousands of dollars in water damage. Next, smoke alarms. Test them, replace the batteries, and make sure they're compliant with current standards. This is perhaps one of the easiest and cheapest safety measures you can take, and it literally saves lives. Then plumbing checks. Look under sinks, around the base of your toilets, even behind your washing machine. Catching a drip early could save you from a warped cabinetry, mold, and even major insurance headaches. And don't forget air conditioning. Quick annual service keeps it running efficiently, which not only avoids breakdowns during peak summer, but also helps ensure that it's not causing your electricity bill to rise exponentially. So, these tasks aren't expensive. Most are free or require just minimal cost, but the payoff is peace of mind and potentially thousands of dollars in savings. So, my suggestion would be block out one day a year, maybe the first weekend of spring, and run through your maintenance checklist. Future you and perhaps your bank account will be very glad that you did.
That's a really good one.
Yeah, definitely a great one, Bern. And for me personally, that actually hits pretty close to home. Quite literally. I think about 3 out of those 4 things you mentioned are on my list to do. One of those things that I have done was the fire alarms, but the 3 things I haven't done are the gutters definitely need cleaning. We've got a leaking toilet. Well, apparently we didn't know we've got ducted aircon. You're supposed to have it serviced every year, and we've lived here about 3.5 years and never had it serviced. So that's a bit of a problem. So yeah, I better get onto those things. But another thing we better get onto is today's topic, and it's essentially home ownership in Australia. So I'll start by asking you the big one, Bern. Is that great Australian dream of home ownership still alive in this country today?
Okay, so according to the latest home ownership statistics that we have, the answer is more complicated than you might think. So over the past few years, many people have warned that property price growth, which has swollen far above that of wages, is making this dream unattainable. So, for example, residential property prices rose 5.5% in 2025, while Australian wages grew 3.4% through 2025. We wrote the news on that on Savings.com.au, in fact. So that's according to the recent wage price index data. So this means, so that's 5.5% versus 3.4%. This means wages are not keeping pace with property prices. But despite rising prices and affordability challenges, Australia's home ownership rate has actually remained surprisingly stable, sitting between 67 and 70% since the 1970s, according to Census 2021. So, Census 2021 is currently the most up to date and credible source we have since the ABS canceled the 2023-24 release of the Survey of Income and Housing due to quality concerns. And that Survey of Income and Housing, or SIH, has a comprehensive estimate of home ownership in Australia and has collected detailed data since around 1994. So, no newer official SIH rate is available as of today. So, back to the 2021 census, it shows that 67% of Australian households own their home. So, that's either with a mortgage or outright. That's around 6.2 million households across the country. So let's break those numbers down a little more. Of that 67%, 35% of households, about 3.3 million, own their home with a mortgage. But that's actually up from 32% in 1999, in 2000s, around 1999, 2000s. And then 32%, or around 2.9 million, own their home outright, so without a mortgage. And that's actually down from 39% in 1999, 2000. And then the remaining 31% are actually renting. So even though the housing market feels tougher, ownership levels haven't collapsed the way many people assume. But then when we zoom out over time, we do see a slow downward trend. So according to the ABS Survey of Income Housing, the one that we had the most current that we have, Australia's home ownership rate has fallen from 71.4% to 66.2% over the past 25 years. So there's a downward trend, but it remains stable, relatively stable.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is a somewhat substantial fall if we think about that 5%, but it's not the sort of fall that I think has always been predicted whenever we talk about, house prices are going up. As I mentioned, we've been talking about that for decades now. House prices are going up. Our kids aren't ever going to be able to own a home. And that's been the message the entire time. And it hasn't happened just yet, but that slide is still interesting and notable. What is driving it, Bern?
Okay, so the short answer to this, we will just go back to property price increases and current wages not being able to keep up with housing costs. But a notable finding that we discovered here, why the numbers in the graphs look like what they are, is because of generational divide. So older Australians are significantly more likely to own their homes, often outright, while younger generations face high entry barriers. So again, property prices have risen far faster than wages, and that gap makes it harder for younger buyers to break through. So this is one reason why the perception of housing being out of reach is so widespread, even though overall home ownership numbers look steadier on paper. But then again, ownership is only half the story. So let's talk about renting. Let's go back to that 31% of Australian households who rent, and that proportion has been growing over time. So this shift reflects affordability pressures and delayed home purchases, especially among people under 40. So as renting becomes a longer-term reality for more Australians, the conversation about rental affordability, security, and standards becomes increasingly important. So again, Australia's home ownership landscape is changing, but the dream, the great Australian dream, isn't dead. It's just different. So the numbers show that home ownership has been remarkably stable for decades, and owning a home is still achievable for many, but the path is getting steeper, especially for younger Aussies facing higher prices, tighter borrowing capacity, and rising living costs.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned obviously that that latest data from the ABS is quite old, 2021, and because they had to cancel their more recent release due to quality concerns. I remember that sparked some, on the far corners of the internet, some conspiracy discussions that perhaps the government wanted to hide the truth, didn't want people to know that home ownership is dramatically plunged to below 60%. So I'm really curious to see what the real number is homes. Because, yeah, as you're saying, on the surface, it actually doesn't look that bad. You'd expect with the rate of property price increases that that would have absolutely plunged, but somehow people are still finding their ways into homes. Perhaps because finance is maybe a bit more accessible to everyone. It used to be pretty hard to qualify for a loan without a 20% deposit. Now you can get loans with 5% deposits, and then not even pay LMI for that 5% because of government initiatives like the home guarantee scheme and whatnot. So I feel like that's all still helping the flow of young people into housing. But I wonder if at some point prices will be so high that everything will just hit a wall, and banks and lenders won't be able to fund these purchases anymore, no matter how much they loosen the purse strings and make it more accessible. We've talked about things like, it used to be the 25-year home loan was the norm, and then now it's the 30-year home loan's the norm. And now we're starting to talk about 40-year home loans to help ensure that amid these extremely high property prices, people can still afford a mortgage. But I just think, like I said, you can only stretch it so far, and eventually maybe that will hit a wall, and we have to wait for property prices will just have to remain stagnant until wages catch up. But anyway, that's an old talk for another day. But great article there from yourself, Bern, on Savings.com.au. For people looking for it, it's called Australian Home Ownership and Rent Statistics, and yes, you can find it on Savings.com.au. Thank you very much once again, Bern, for your terrific insights.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bern. It's been great.